The supermarket was a symphony of indifference, a sprawling cavern of fluorescent lights and polished linoleum where every soul was an island. The air hummed with the drone of refrigerators and the incessant beeping of checkout scanners, a soundtrack for the hurried and the preoccupied. Carts clashed like bumper cars in a slow-motion derby, steered by faces etched with the familiar anxieties of budgets and deadlines. Among them moved Clara, a single mother whose own worries were a constant-day, quiet companion. Her grocery list, a carefully curated map of survival, felt heavier than the paper it was written on. Each item she placed in her cart was a small victory against the tide of expenses that threatened to pull her under. She moved with a practiced invisibility, her gaze fixed on the task at hand, trying to block out the noise and the crushing loneliness of being just another face in the anonymous crowd. Across the aisle, a small beacon of stillness captured her attention amidst the chaos. It was a young boy, perhaps 9 or 10, navigating the world from the confines of a worn, manual wheelchair. His name was Leo, though she didn't know it then. He moved with a quiet determination, his thin arms propelling him past towering shelves of brightly colored boxes that promised happiness he couldn't afford. He stopped near the candy section, his gaze lingering on a simple chocolate bar. There was a profound sadness in his eyes, a silent acceptance of his limitations that felt far too heavy for such young shoulders. He picked up the bar, his small fingers tracing the wrapper, not with the intent of a thief, but with the gentle curiosity of a child window shopping for a dream. He was a portrait of innocence, completely vulnerable in this place of transactional haste. Suddenly, a shadow fell over the boy, large and imposing. A stern-faced security guard, his uniform stretched taut over a bulky frame, loomed over the wheelchair. His voice, a harsh, gravelly sound, sliced through the air, sharp and accusatory. "What do you think you're doing with that, kid?" The words were a public indictment, and the few shoppers nearby paused, their curiosity piqued, before quickly looking away, eager to erase themselves from the unfolding drama. The guard pointed a thick finger at the chocolate bar resting in Leo's lap, his posture radiating suspicion and impatience. The boy flinched as if struck, his face turning a deep shade of crimson. The entire aisle seemed to hold its breath, the injustice of the moment hanging thick and heavy in the air, a stain on the day's mundane errands for all to see and for all to ignore. Clara felt her own breath catch in her throat, her heart beginning to pound a frantic rhythm against her ribs. A cold wave of fear washed over her. "Walk away," a voice in her head screamed. "This isn't your fight. You have your own child to worry about, a precarious job, and bills that never stop coming. Drawing attention to yourself is the last thing you need." But then her eyes met Leo's. She saw the terror in them, the glistening of unshed tears, and the profound humiliation of being wrongfully accused. Utterly powerless, it was a look she recognized, the look of someone cornered by a world that was too often unfair and unkind. In that child's frightened expression, she saw a reflection of her own struggles, and a fierce, protective instinct ignited within her, a fire that burned away all her carefully constructed caution. She tightened her grip on the cold metal handle of her shopping cart, her knuckles turning white. The decision was made not in her head, but in her soul. Taking a deliberate step forward, she pushed her cart into the space between the guard and the boy, creating a fragile barrier. The world around her seemed to fade into a blur as she found her voice. A voice she rarely used to challenge anyone. All she wanted was to defend a helpless child, a simple, anonymous act of compassion in a place that had none to spare. She was completely unaware that from the end of the aisle, hidden behind a display of cereal boxes, a pair of discerning eyes watched her every move. This single, selfless act of defiance was a spark in the darkness, about to ignite a future she couldn't possibly imagine. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of adrenaline and fear. The guard turned his hostile gaze upon her, his eyes narrowing into slits of pure annoyance. "This doesn't concern you, ma'am. Move along." His voice was a low growl. A clear dismissal meant to put her back in her place as just another anonymous shopper. For a fleeting second, every rational thought in her mind screamed for her to obey, to retreat back into the safety of the crowd and forget she ever saw the boy's terrified face. She thought of her own daughter waiting at home, of the fragile stability she fought for every single day. Getting involved could mean trouble, a complaint, or even being banned from the one store she could afford. But her conscience was a louder voice, a clear, ringing bell of duty that refused to be silenced by fear. Finding a strength she didn't know she possessed, Clara met the guard's glare without flinching. "I saw the entire thing," she stated, her voice trembling slightly but laced with an undeniable firmness. He wasn't trying to steal it, he just picked it up to look at it. Like any child would. She gestured toward the colorful aisle, a silent plea for reason. The security guard let out a short, derisive laugh, a sound that echoed with condescension. "Right, and I suppose it just fell into his lap." He pointed a thick, accusatory finger at the chocolate bar, treating it like irrefutable evidence in a high-stakes trial. The few shoppers who had stopped to watch averted their eyes, their silence a form of passive judgment. Their discomfort was palpable, making Clara feel utterly alone on her small island of defiance, a spectacle in a drama no one else wanted to join. Throughout the tense exchange, the boy, Leo, remained a statue of silent fear, his small hands clutching the foil-wrapped chocolate as if it were a life raft. His eyes, wide and glistening with unshed tears, darted from the guard's angry face to Clara's determined one. In her, he saw an unexpected champion, a flicker of hope in a moment of profound humiliation. Clara's heart ached for him. She softened her expression, deliberately turning her body to shield him from the guard's intimidating presence. "Is that your favorite kind?" she asked gently, her voice a stark contrast to the harsh accusations filling the air. Before he could even nod, the guard interjected, his patience clearly gone. "It doesn't matter what he likes. It matters that he's a thief." "We have a zero-tolerance policy here, lady. Now back off before you become part of the problem." The guard reached for the radio clipped to his belt, his thumb hovering over the button. "That's it. I'm calling my manager and the police. You can explain your story to them." The threat hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Police. The word sent a jolt of ice through Clara's veins. She envisioned a report, questions, a permanent mark on a record she had kept clean her entire life. She saw the cascading consequences, a call to her employer, the shame of explaining it to her daughter, the possibility of being trespassed from the store she relied on. Every survival instinct urged her to apologize, to melt back into the crowd and save herself. But then she looked down at Leo, whose face had crumpled in utter despair. She knew in that instant that her integrity was not for sale, not for convenience or for safety. With a quiet resolve that settled over her like a heavy blanket, Clara made her choice. She let go of her shopping cart and reached into the worn handbag slung over her shoulder. Her fingers, though trembling, moved with purpose, bypassing her grocery list to find her wallet. It held the carefully counted cash meant for a week's worth of meals, a testament to her tight budget. Without hesitation, she pulled out a crumpled $5 bill. She leaned forward, placing the money gently on top of the chocolate bar in Leo's lap, her touch a silent reassurance. Straightening up, she looked the guard directly in the eye, her own gaze now as hard as his. "There," she said, her voice steady and clear, cutting through the tension. "It's paid for. Now you will leave this child alone." The finality of her words hung in the air, a challenge and a promise. The security guard's face was a mask of thwarted authority, his jaw tight with resentment. He shot Clara a final, venomous glare before turning on his heel, his heavy footsteps echoing a grudging retreat down the aisle. The small audience of shoppers, their brief moment of drama concluded, quickly dispersed, their carts rattling away as they eagerly returned to their own private worlds. The tension in the aisle didn't so much break as it did dissolve, leaving behind a fragile, almost sacred silence. The hum of the refrigerators and the distant beep of a scanner rushed back in to fill the void. Clara's entire focus narrowed to the small, trembling figure before her. She saw not a problem or a disruption, but a child who had been made to feel small and worthless, and her heart ached with a fierce, maternal empathy that transcended blood. She knelt, the worn fabric of her jeans pressing against the cold, polished linoleum, bringing herself down to his eye level. The world from this vantage point was different, a forest of towering shelves and indifferent adult legs. She offered him a small, reassuring smile, trying to erase the memory of the guard's ugly scowl. "Chocolate is a serious business, you know," she said softly, her voice a gentle murmur. "You have to choose just the right one. It looks like you have excellent taste." Leo looked up, his large, dark eyes still shimmering with unshed tears, but the terror was beginning to recede. He clutched the candy bar, its crinkling wrapper the only sound between them. A tiny, hesitant smile touched the corner of his lips, a fragile dawn breaking over his shadowed face, and it felt to Clara like the most profound reward she had ever received. "Why don't you stick with me while I grab a few more things?" Clara suggested, her tone light and casual, as if they were old friends. She rose and gave her own cart a gentle push. "You can be my official chocolate consultant." Leo nodded, a shy but definite agreement. He propelled his wheelchair forward, falling into a slow, comfortable pace beside her. It was a strange, impromptu parade of two, a struggling mother and a silent boy, united by a small act of defiance. They moved past the dairy section, the cold air misting around them, and she found herself talking to him, telling him about her daughter, Lily, and how she also loved chocolate but preferred the kind with caramel. He listened intently, his quiet presence a comforting balm after the harsh confrontation, making the vast, impersonal store feel a little less lonely. As they neared the produce section, a natural question surfaced in Clara's mind. "Where is your mum, sweetie? Is she here somewhere?" She scanned the nearby aisles, expecting to see a worried parent searching for her son. Leo's gaze drifted toward the far end of the store, his expression unreadable for a moment. "She's here," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "She likes to watch. She says you learn more about people when you're quiet, and they don't know you're looking." A small furrow appeared on Clara's brow. It was a peculiar thing for a child to say, but she quickly dismissed it as the odd, imaginative phrasing of a little boy. Her focus remained on his well-being, on making sure he felt safe until he was reunited with his family, never suspecting the profound truth hidden in his innocent words. At the checkout lane, as Clara unloaded her modest groceries onto the conveyor belt, Leo did something that caught her completely by surprise. With deliberate, careful movements, he unwrapped his chocolate bar, broke off a small square from the end, and held it out to her. It was a simple offering, a child's currency of gratitude, yet it felt monumental. Her eyes welled as she accepted it, the sweet taste of the chocolate mingling with the overwhelming warmth spreading through her chest. In that moment, a bond was forged, silent and unbreakable. Just as the cashier announced her total, a calm, clear voice spoke directly behind them, cutting through the noise of the store. "Excuse me," the voice said, gentle but firm. "I believe you helped my son." Clara turned, and her eyes met those of a plainly dressed woman whose simple appearance belied a powerful, unnerving stillness. The woman's eyes, a shade of deep, storm-tossed grey, held a universe of sorrow that seemed out of place amidst the mundane backdrop of the grocery store. She offered Clara a smile, but it didn't quite reach her eyes, which were fixed on the gentle way Clara spoke to Leo. "Thank you," she said again, her voice a low, melodic hum that carried the weight of unspoken history. It's been a long time since someone stood up for him without knowing who he was. She gestured vaguely around the store, a flicker of pain crossing her features. "We don't come to this part of the city often. After his father passed, things became complicated." The words hung in the air, a carefully placed veil over a wound that was clearly still raw, hinting at a past far more tragic than her simple, worn clothing could ever suggest. As they stood there in the strange intimacy of the checkout line, the woman, who introduced herself only as Eleanor, began to speak, her words weaving a story of a life before. She described a time of shared dreams and financial struggles, a life not unlike Clara's, filled with love that made their poverty bearable. Then she spoke of the accident. It happened on a rainy Tuesday, a blur of screeching tires and shattering glass. A drunk driver in a luxury sedan had run a red light, taking her husband's life in an instant and crushing Leo's spine against the twisted metal. The driver, a man insulated by wealth and influence, walked away with a fine, his lawyers painting the incident as an unavoidable tragedy, while her family was left with an unbearable void and a mountain of debt. Eleanor's voice grew softer, almost a whisper, as she described the cruel irony that followed. A year later, a forgotten inheritance from a distant relative had descended upon them like a strange, hollow miracle. Suddenly, they were unimaginably wealthy. The money solved their financial problems, providing Leo with the best medical care, but it couldn't mend their broken hearts or turn back time. It became a barrier, isolating them in a world of opulence where every smile felt calculated and every act of kindness seemed to have a price tag. She explained that she came to places like this, dressed in old clothes, searching for a ghost, the feeling of a normal life, a moment of genuine human connection untainted by the knowledge of her fortune. Her gaze drifted past Clara to where the security guard was now laughing loudly with a cashier, completely oblivious to the echoes of pain his actions had stirred. "That man," Eleanor said, a cold edge returning to her voice. "He looked at my son with the same contempt as the man who destroyed our family. The assumption that because someone appears to have less, they are less honest, less worthy of respect." It was this deep-seated injustice she had been fighting against in her own quiet, invisible way. She had watched the entire scene unfold, her heart in her throat, praying that for once someone would see past the wheelchair and the worn clothes to the innocent child within. Clara's intervention wasn't just about a chocolate bar. It was a defiant act of seeing, a validation that humanity still existed. A profound sense of gratitude washed over Eleanor's face, finally chasing away the shadows from her eyes. "You showed my son that strangers can be kind, that the world isn't entirely made of bullies and bystanders. That is a priceless gift." She reached into the pocket of her simple coat and pulled out a plain, unassuming business card. She pressed it firmly into Clara's hand, her touch conveying an urgent sincerity. "I don't believe in coincidences. Please, call this number tomorrow. I insist." Clara glanced down at the card, her brow furrowed in confusion. The embossed letters spelled out a name that stole the air from her lungs. Eleanor Vance, CEO of Vance Industries, the massive conglomerate that had just acquired the company where Clara worked, the same company rumored to be announcing devastating layoffs. But what Clara couldn't know was that Eleanor wasn't just a CEO. She was a woman looking for a reason to believe in people again. The next morning, Clara stared at the business card resting on her small kitchen table. Its crisp, its white edges, a stark contrast to the worn wood grain beneath it. The embossed letters felt heavy, important. Vance Industries. The name echoed in her mind, a vague whisper from news reports about corporate mergers and stock market titans. A cold knot of doubt began to form in her stomach. It felt like a cruel joke, a bizarre misunderstanding. Why would a woman dressed so simply, a woman who spoke of such profound loss and struggle. We connected to a corporate giant. But the memory of Eleanor's eyes, the sincere, urgent plea in them, felt undeniably real. With a deep breath that did little to calm her racing heart, she picked up her phone. Her fingers, trembling slightly, dialed the number. A calm, professional voice answered immediately. "Vance Industries, office of the CEO." The words struck Clara like a physical blow, stealing the air from her lungs. The bus ride downtown was a surreal journey into a world she only ever saw from a distance. She smoothed down the fabric of her nicest blouse for the 10th time, feeling its threads thin and inadequate under her nervous fingers. The Vance Industries Tower was not just a building, it was a declaration of power, a shard of smoked glass and gleaming steel that sliced into the afternoon sky, reflecting the clouds with cold indifference. Stepping into the lobby was like entering a cathedral built for commerce. The air was cool and still, smelling faintly of leather and success. The cavernous space, all polished marble and silent efficiency, amplified her sense of being an imposter. A receptionist, with a polite, impenetrable smile, directed her to a private elevator. As the car ascended with a silent, gut-wrenching speed, the city shrinking below, Clara felt the last remnants of her composure begin to crumble. This was not the world of the woman she met yesterday. The elevator doors opened onto a floor of breathtaking silence and space. The reception area was an expanse of minimalist art and designer furniture, larger and more pristine than her entire apartment. A young man, his suit tailored to perfection, greeted her by name without her having to introduce herself. He led her down a wide, sunlit hallway, her worn shoes making no sound on the thick plush carpet that seemed to absorb all noise, all anxiety, all traces of the outside world. The only sound was the frantic, muffled drumming of her own heart against her ribs. He stopped before a pair of imposing wooden doors that reached nearly to the ceiling. With a respectful nod, he pushed one open, revealing the room beyond, and gestured for her to step inside. The world seemed to fall away at her feet as she was met with a dizzying panoramic view of the entire city, laid out like a map beneath a wall of pure glass. There, in the center of the vast office, standing before a desk that seemed carved from a single piece of dark, polished wood, was Eleanor. The transformation was absolute, staggering. Gone were the worn jeans and the simple coat, replaced by a tailored navy blue suit that radiated quiet, unshakable authority. Her hair, which had been pulled back loosely at the store, was now styled in a way that framed a face that was no longer just sad, but formidable. The sorrow was still there, deep in her grey eyes, but it was now shielded by a layer of corporate resolve, the look of a woman accustomed to making decisions that affected thousands of lives. She offered a small, welcoming smile, the only trace of the person Clara remembered. "Clara," she said, her voice the same, yet now it carried the unmistakable echo of power. "Thank you for coming. Please, sit down." Clara stood frozen in the doorway, her mind a maelstrom of confusion and shock. The two versions of Eleanor warred in her head. The grieving mother in the supermarket aisle, and the powerful CEO in her sky-high fortress. It didn't make sense. A dizzying sense of vertigo washed over her, as if the floor itself had dropped out from under her. She felt small, naive, and strangely deceived. Had the entire encounter been some kind of bizarre test, a game played by a reclusive billionaire to gauge the morality of the common person? The simple act of kindness she had offered, a gesture born from pure empathy, now felt hopelessly entangled in a web of wealth and power she couldn't begin to comprehend. Her world hadn't just been turned upside down, it had been fundamentally broken, and she had no idea what this powerful, enigmatic woman wanted from her, A cold, hard shell began to form around Clara's heart, instantly extinguishing the warmth she had felt just moments before. The panoramic view of the city, once breathtaking, now felt oppressive, a symbol of the unbridgeable gulf between her world and Eleanor's. The luxurious office was no longer a place of opportunity, but a stage, and she felt like the unwitting lead in a cruel play. Her act of simple compassion in the supermarket now seemed stripped of its purity, reframed as a test she had unknowingly passed. A wave of humiliation washed over her, hot and stinging. She felt profoundly foolish, as if her genuine empathy had been observed and graded by a secret panel of one. Her gaze fell from Eleanor's powerful silhouette to her own worn shoes on the impossibly plush carpet, and she had never felt smaller or more out of place in her entire life. Eleanor gestured toward a leather chair, her voice retaining its calm, melodic quality, but to Clara it now sounded hollow, detached from the reality of the woman who had shared a story of grief in a checkout line. "Please, Clara, I wanted to thank you properly, what you did for Leo." But Clara couldn't hear the gratitude. All she could hear was the echo of deception. Had the story of the car crash, the lost husband, the inherited wealth been real, or was it all part of the elaborate costume? The thought made her stomach churn. She felt used, her emotions manipulated by a billionaire seeking an authentic experience. The kindness she had offered, a gesture that had cost her one of her last $5 bills, now felt cheapened, reduced to a curious social experiment for the wealthy and bored. She crossed her arms over her chest, a subconscious barrier against the woman and her opulent world. Finding her voice, which was now tight and brittle, Clara took a step back toward the door, away from the desk and the woman behind it. "Why didn't you tell me who you were?" The question was quiet, but it landed in the silent room with the force of an accusation. "Yesterday, in that store, was that some kind of game for you, a test to see if the little people are still decent?" The words were sharper than she intended, fueled by a deep sense of betrayal and wounded pride. She wasn't looking for a reward or a handout. The connection she had felt with Eleanor and Leo had been real to her, a brief, shining moment of solidarity in a difficult life. Now, that moment felt irrevocably tainted, a transaction she hadn't agreed to. She wanted nothing from this powerful stranger who played at being ordinary. A flicker of genuine pain crossed Eleanor's face, her carefully composed expression crumbling for a moment. "No, Clara, it wasn't a test. Everything I told you was true. My grief is real. My loneliness is real." She took a step from behind her desk, her hands open in a gesture of appeal. "In my world, kindness always comes with a price tag, with an expectation. I dress that way and go to places like that just to feel normal, to see if genuine goodness still exists without the influence of my name. What you did, it was pure. You gave me hope." But her explanation, however sincere, was lost in the vastness of the power imbalance. To Clara, it sounded like the justification of someone who could afford to treat the real world like a temporary escape, a place to visit before returning to a fortress in the sky. Clara shook her head slowly, a single, devastating gesture of rejection. The chasm between them was too wide to cross with words. "I'm sorry for your loss," she said, her voice flat and devoid of the empathy she had so freely given yesterday. "But I think I should go." She turned her back on Eleanor, on the breathtaking view, on the unspoken offer of a different life, and walked toward the imposing wooden doors. The silence she left behind was heavy with the weight of misunderstanding and shattered potential. As her hand reached for the cold brass handle, Eleanor's voice called out her name, no longer the command of a CEO, but the desperate, cracking plea of a lonely mother. "Clara." Wait." But Clara didn't stop, her pride a rigid shield as she pulled the heavy door open, leaving the audience to wonder if it would ever close the distance between them. As Clara's hand closed around the cold, unyielding brass of the door handle, a sound stopped her, not of a command, but of a heartbreaking. He asked if you were an angel. Eleanor's voice was stripped of all its corporate authority, leaving only the raw, trembling vulnerability of a mother. Clara paused, her back still rigid, but the words seeped through her armor of wounded pride. When we got home, Leo wouldn't let go of the chocolate wrapper. He told me, the angel paid for it. He hasn't spoken that much in a single sentence since the accident. The image of the small boy, treasuring a simple wrapper as a relic of kindness, was a powerful counterpoint to the opulent office. It pulled Clara back from the precipice of her anger, reminding her that before the business cards and the skyscrapers, there was just a child in a wheelchair who had been afraid, and she had been his comfort. Slowly, Clara turned back around, her expression no longer one of rejection, but of weary confusion. Eleanor had stepped away from the imposing desk, closing the physical and emotional distance between them. Tears glistened in the powerful CEO's eyes, tracing paths down a face that now looked profoundly lonely. "I'm so sorry, Clara. I wasn't testing you. I was testing the world. After my husband died and the money came, everyone I knew changed. Their smiles had price tags. Their sympathy felt like an investment. I go to those places, dressed like that, just to remember what it feels like to be invisible, to be normal. For one afternoon, you let me be just a mother again. You saw my son. Not his chair, not our presumed poverty, but him. It was a gift. And in my fear of losing its purity, I mishandled it. I was wrong." The confession hung in the quiet, sunlit air, raw and honest. Clara felt the tight knot of betrayal in her chest begin to loosen. She finally understood. The disguise wasn't an act of deception against her, but a shield for Eleanor's own wounded heart. She saw the profound loneliness that wealth could build, a prison with a breathtaking view. Her own struggles with poverty suddenly felt connected to Eleanor's, two sides of the same coin of isolation. She remembered the guard's contemptuous sneer and her own fierce, protective instinct. That feeling was real, untainted by money or status. She had not been a fool, she had been a human being connecting with another, and that truth was more powerful than any misunderstanding that followed. Her empathy, which had been momentarily eclipsed by pride, flooded back in a warm, healing wave, washing away the last of her resentment. "My company has a philanthropic division," Eleanor continued, her voice regaining a measure of steadiness as she outlined a new possibility. "It donates millions every year, but it's run by executives who analyze spreadsheets and write checks from a distance. It has resources, but it has no soul. It has no one like you." She took another step closer, her gaze intense and sincere. "And I don't want to give you a reward, Clara. I want to offer you a role. I need someone to run that foundation, someone who understands that a $5 act of kindness can be more valuable than $1 million donation. I need someone who sees people, not numbers. I need your heart to guide our hands." It wasn't an offer of charity, it was an acknowledgement of her character, a chance to turn her single act of compassion into a lifetime of changing the world for others. Clara looked from Eleanor's pleading face to the sprawling city below, its endless streets and buildings suddenly looking different. They were no longer a symbol of a world she was excluded from, but a landscape of opportunity, filled with countless other Leos who needed a champion. A slow, genuine smile, the first one since she'd entered the building, spread across her face. "I think," she said softly, her voice filled with a newfound sense of purpose, "that Leo and my daughter would get along very well." In that simple sentence, a bridge was built across the chasm of wealth and misunderstanding. It was an acceptance, a forgiveness, and the beginning of a partnership forged not in a boardroom, but in the humble aisle of a supermarket. The afternoon sun streamed through the glass, enveloping them both in a warm, hopeful light, signaling that the fractured pieces of their encounter were finally being made whole. The world did not change overnight, but for Clara it was reborn. The frantic mornings of counting every coin for the bus fare were replaced by a quiet, purposeful calm. Her new office at the head of the Vance Foundation wasn't just a room with a view. It was a command center for compassion, a place where her innate empathy was now her greatest professional asset. She no longer scanned grocery aisles for the cheapest brand, but reviewed proposals that could feed hundreds. Her signature now a vessel of hope for countless families. On her desk, next to a framed photo of her daughter Lily, sat another of Leo, his smile wide and genuine. It was a daily reminder that her life hadn't been saved by a job, but transformed by a choice, a single defiant step forward in a cold supermarket aisle, proving that a person's true worth is measured not by what they have, but by what they are willing to give when they have almost nothing left. Their two families, once separated by an invisible chasm of wealth and circumstance, had blended into one. Weekends were no longer solitary affairs, but were filled with the sound of shared laughter that echoed through Eleanor's spacious, yet once empty, home. They would often gather in the garden, a vibrant tapestry of green, where Lily would tell Leo stories, her voice animated and bright, while he listened with an attentiveness that spoke volumes. Eleanor would watch them, the perpetual sadness in her eyes replaced by a soft, shimmering light of peace. She saw not a charity case in Clara, but an equal, a friend, and the sister she never had. They were a peculiar, beautiful mosaic of broken pieces glued back together by a child's chocolate bar, a testament to the fact that family is not always the one you are born into, but the one you build through acts of unconditional love and acceptance. It is in these quiet moments of reflection that the true architecture of destiny is revealed. We are so often taught to look for grand signs and loud opportunities, to plan our ascent up a ladder we believe leads to happiness. Yet, the universe often works in whispers, placing our most profound turning points in the most unassuming of places, a crowded aisle, a stranger's momentary pain, a choice that seems insignificant to the world, but is monumental to our soul. For it is often said that an act of kindness performed in the dark is what shines the brightest light on your path. Clara never sought a reward. She sought only to shield a child from cruelty. That single, selfless impulse was the key, the one that unlocked not a door to wealth, but a door to a life of meaning, proving that our character is forged in the moments we stand for others. Think of the countless opportunities for connection that pass us by each day, disguised as interruptions or inconveniences. A person in need, a word of encouragement left unspoken, a moment to stand up for what is right while the rest of the world looks away. We convince ourselves that our small gestures are meaningless in the face of the world's vast indifference, but as Clara's story shows, a single drop of compassion can create ripples that cross an entire ocean. If this story of a mother's courage and a stranger's kindness touched your heart, consider sharing it as a reminder of the quiet power we all hold. Let it be a testament to the idea that the most heroic thing we can ever do is to simply see the humanity in another and act on it without expectation. The late afternoon sun cast a warm, golden glow over the park, filtering through the leaves of the ancient oak trees. Eleanor and Clara sat on a bench, watching as Lily carefully placed a daisy chain on Leo's head, crowning him the king of their small, imperfect kingdom. He let out a peal of pure, uninhibited laughter, a sound that was now as common as the birdsong around them. Eleanor reached over and gently placed her hand on Clara's, a simple, silent gesture that communicated a universe of gratitude, respect, and deep, abiding friendship. Clara smiled, a soft, peaceful expression settling on her face as she watched the children play. Her life was no longer a struggle for survival, but a celebration of connection. In that tranquil moment, it was clear that the greatest treasures are not locked away in vaults, but are found in the richness of a shared smile and the profound, life-altering power of a kind heart.